Welcome back to Outlaw Operations, the place where shadows tell secrets no one else dares to share. Tonight, we peel back the layers of a dark story tangled in love, deception, and greed, a journey from hopeful beginnings to bitter endings. Huge respect to all who've joined the ride so far. But here's something wild: almost everyone watching hasn't joined the family yet. So if you're still lurking on the sidelines, why not step in? Hit subscribe and become part of the mystery. Brace yourself, this story isn't just told, it's lived. In the dark stillness of April 30th, 2011, at nearly 4 a.m., a 911 call pierced the silence in a quiet neighborhood. Brett Setkat, his voice strained and breathless, told dispatchers something almost too tragic to comprehend. His wife, Vashi, had taken her own life and set their home ablaze. While their two small sons, just 2 and 4 years old, slept innocently in the nursery upstairs, fire was crawling its way through their world. Brett claimed he saved the boys first, bundling them out into the night and placing them in the car for safety. He begged to go back inside, to retrieve his wife from the inferno, but the flames and smoke were merciless. The dispatcher told him not to go back in, to stay with the children. And so he stood there, barefoot on the pavement, his home glowing orange behind him like a scene from a nightmare. When firefighters arrived and beat down the blaze, they found Vashi's body. She was on the left side of the bed, her arms and legs bent in a contorted, almost defensive position, like someone caught in a final moment of agony. Her face bore no peace. Just a question. One that no one has been able to answer since. Brett told the police a story. He said that Vashi had called for him while he was sleeping on the couch downstairs. He woke to her voice, groggy and confused. She was unwell, he claimed, and he told her to bring the boys down from the nursery. She obeyed, moving almost like a ghost, silent, disturbed. He thought she just needed rest, quiet. Then he heard the bedroom door slam, hard, and moments later, flames burst through the ceiling. He ran upstairs, only to find her bleeding and unconscious on the bed. He tried to pull her up, to drag her out, but the fire roared too close. The heat forced him back. He had to save the boys first. He made it out. But she didn't. Brett was certain she had set the fire herself. He said she had long battled shadows in her mind, depression, paranoia, whispers that clawed at her thoughts. He believed she shot herself, set the fire, and left him behind to pick up the pieces. But things didn't add up. The detectives walked through the ruins. Next to the bed was a gas can. It was unmistakable, the fire was intentional. And then there was the gun. It was found beneath her body, barrel pointing down. It didn't make sense. Suicide by gunshot, especially to the head, doesn't usually end with the weapon under the body in that position. In Vashi's purse, investigators found a list. It wasn't a grocery list or errands, it was a death ledger. It detailed funeral costs, the mortgage, the car, and future education expenses. She had written down how her life insurance should be used. Her planning was meticulous. But why the fire? Why the pain? Inside her car was a notebook. Folded between scribbled pages of thoughts and fears was a goodbye letter that didn't feel like a confession, it felt like a cry. She wrote to her boys, Bronson and Brendan, pouring love into every line. "Take care of our boys," she wrote. "Be nice to Brendan. Mommy is proud of you, Bronson." She wrote that she couldn't fight anymore. That the darkness had won. But there was more. One of the neighbors, wide awake watching television around 3:15 a.m., heard gunshots. Not one. Multiple. She clearly remembered it. But Brett didn't call 911 until 3:57 a.m. 42 minutes. What was he doing in that time? Why the silence? The autopsy revealed that Vashi didn't die from the fire. She had been shot in the head. And the chest. And the thighs. The fire came later. She didn't burn, she bled. And that detail changed everything. There were no drugs in her system. No alcohol. Just clean blood and bullet holes. The kind of wounds that make you ask, who did this? Her funeral took place right outside the charred skeleton of their home. Family and friends gathered, many too stunned to speak. Her siblings, Kathleen and Rich, stood together in a daze. But unlike the others, they didn't buy Brett's story. Something didn't sit right. When they went to the house afterward, they saw a large portrait of Vashi over the fireplace. Kathleen approached it, ready to speak words of comfort, but Brett stopped her. His face changed. "I don't want to talk about her," he said coldly. To Vashi's family, that was all they needed to hear. They called the sheriff's office themselves. They insisted she hadn't taken her own life. She wouldn't. Not Vashi. They demanded a full investigation, and they began keeping close tabs on Brett. Every word, every action. They told the police about the marriage, how it had changed. How Brett had grown distant, cold, sometimes angry. How Vashi had called them late at night in tears, unsure of her place in the home she once loved. To the world, they had been the picture-perfect couple. High school sweethearts. She was the beauty, he was the athlete. He won trophies, she won hearts. They married, had kids, bought a house. But behind the closed doors, something had decayed. The cracks had spread like rot. And now Vashi was gone. Her boys motherless. Her body burned and broken. And her husband, the man who was supposed to protect her, stood with wet eyes and dry words. Maybe Brett was telling the truth. Maybe she did fall into despair so deep that she believed death was a gift. But then again, maybe not. Maybe someone else set that fire. Maybe someone pulled the trigger more than once. Maybe someone waited too long before calling for help. Maybe someone had something to hide. The house is gone now, and the ashes have long since cooled. But the questions remain. And the shadows they cast still whisper in the night. They were the picture of a happy couple. The kind of love that small-town dreams are made of. After tying the knot in 2004 in Bays, they planted their roots in Brett's hometown, Kingman, Kansas. A sleepy place with just over 3,000 people. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's dogs by name, where people left their doors unlocked at night. They bought a modest home on a quiet street, filled it with warmth, laughter, and eventually, 2 sons, Brendan and Bronson. By the time the tragedy struck, Brendan was just 4. Bronson barely 2. To neighbors and friends, their home looked peaceful. Vashi was warm, intelligent, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and brought casseroles to grieving families. Brett, a police academy instructor, seemed like the ideal small-town father. Stern, perhaps, but protective. He spoke proudly of Vashi often, about her dedication to her job in the HR department of a bustling advertising firm. But behind those doors, things were cracking. Vashi's long hours at work gnawed at Brett. He couldn't understand why she was always late, why her dedication seemed to extend more towards spreadsheets and office meetings than family dinners. He earned enough, more than enough, and in his eyes, she had no reason to push herself to exhaustion. But Vashi wasn't doing it for the money, she was clinging to a part of herself that hadn't yet been swallowed by the walls of their home. She loved her job. It made her feel purposeful. Alive. But lately, even that hadn't been enough. She was unraveling. The spark in her eyes had dimmed, the glow in her smile replaced with fatigue and a kind of quiet sadness. Her boss had noticed it. So had her friends. There were whispers about hormonal imbalances, prescribed medications meant to help with weight loss, medications with dark side effects, exhaustion, anxiety, mood swings. Vashi became withdrawn. She no longer laughed like she used to, no longer danced in the kitchen while making pancakes on Saturday mornings. Still, she tried. After all, she was a mother. A devoted one. She woke up every morning at 4 to make fresh food for her boys, vegetable purees, oatmeal from scratch, never store-bought jars. When a boy at Brendan's preschool was diagnosed with cancer, she organized bake sales, flipped pancakes on chilly mornings, and gave every cent she raised to his family. But love, sometimes, is not enough to keep someone from breaking. By November 2010, things had become unbearable. The arguments between Vashi and Brett were no longer rare, they were daily, explosive, exhausting. They tried counseling, both together and separately. They sat across from therapists, hands clenched in their laps, trading accusations masked as concerns. Nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. Vashi began avoiding home altogether, finding reasons to be anywhere but under the same roof as Brett. Behind the cold walls of their home, Brett had grown controlling. Not just with her, but with the children. He monitored who she spoke to, restricted her calls, even with her own family. If someone dared to call when he was home, he'd seethe in silence or lash out in anger. He treated his family like a battalion. Discipline. Obedience. No room for softness. No tears, no weakness, not even from his toddlers. He was molding them, he believed, into strong men. But what he really forged was fear. Vash's sister, Kathleen, later called him a narcissist. An abuser. A man obsessed with power and dominance. She said he punished the boys physically. That he made Vashi feel small, powerless, erased. Eventually, something shifted. Maybe it was the therapy. Maybe it was simply exhaustion. But Vashi made a decision. She went to a lawyer, filed for divorce, and asked for custody. She didn't want to erase Brett from the boys' lives, she was still willing to let them see their father on weekends. But this was her first step toward freedom. Her eyes began to shine again. She booked tickets for a concert. Planned a vacation to Hawaii with her sister. She even went shopping, filling bags with new clothes, bright colors, soft fabrics, hopeful styles. They were still in their bags, tags untouched, when the fire happened. Yes. The fire. The one that consumed everything she was building for herself. It happened so fast. Flames erupted in the dead of night, swallowing the home in a terrifying roar. By the time firefighters arrived, it was too late. The walls had collapsed. The air was thick with ash and grief. And what was left, what little there was, told no clear story. But suspicion has a way of rising from the smoke. At first, it was assumed that Vashi had taken her own life. A tragic case of a mother lost in depression, driven to a desperate act. But that explanation didn't sit right. Not with her family. Not with those who had seen her eyes light up just days before, as she talked about her trip, as she held her new dresses against the mirror and smiled. No one believed she could set a fire that endangered her children. Not the woman who made fresh porridge every morning, who fundraised for strangers, who slept in her son's room when they had nightmares. Then came Brett's 911 call. It was cold. Flat. Detached. The kind of voice you'd expect from someone reporting a car alarm, not a house fire with his family inside. Detectives listened to it again and again, and the same chill crawled up their spines. Something was wrong. They dug deeper. They discovered isolation, control, violence. They spoke to neighbors, teachers, therapists. A pattern emerged. A story no one had seen unfolding. A story of a woman trying to escape a man who saw her as his possession. Of children raised in fear. Of a marriage rotting from the inside. Some began to believe that the fire hadn't been Vash's doing at all. That maybe, just maybe, the person she had feared most was the one who struck the match. And the scariest part of all was that in a town so small, so quiet, so tightly wound in church bells and bake sales, no one had seen it coming. Not until it was too late. The night felt heavier than usual, like the world itself was holding its breath. Vashi had spent the last few weeks tiptoeing through a house that no longer felt like a home. The laughter of her children echoed through rooms filled with tension. Behind every door, she feared Brett's voice, his glare, the threats he no longer bothered to whisper. She had finally done what she had thought about for months, she filed for divorce. The papers were delivered just days before her death, and with them came a storm of rage from the man she once trusted with her life. Brett didn't take it well. The news shattered him, or maybe just shattered the illusion he tried so hard to maintain. The control he clung to was slipping through his fingers, and control was everything to him. According to Kathleen, a close family friend, Brett had a history of threats. He had told Vashi again and again that if she dared to leave, he'd drag her through hell. He'd take the kids, vanish, leave her with nothing but regret. He warned her that he'd make sure she'd never see her sons again. Those weren't empty words to her. They were a window into a nightmare she lived in silence. She had endured it longer than most could bear. But something in her had shifted, maybe it was fear, maybe the will to survive. She couldn't keep pretending. She took the kids and left one night after another heated argument, seeking safety, peace, clarity. She thought giving Brett space would help him reflect. She believed, maybe foolishly, that when she returned, he'd have made a decision to walk away peacefully. But Brett had no intention of walking away. A few days later, with a wounded look and a trembling voice, he asked her to meet. He told her he missed the children. He begged to see them. He said he had nowhere to go, nowhere to sleep. Vashi, always empathetic, returned home with him the following morning. That night, she died. Police questioned the therapist Vashi had seen in the days before her death. What they heard chilled them. Vashi had spoken about Brett's threats, not just arguments, but terrifying confessions. Brett once told her about a dream where he killed her. And he didn't just leave it at that, he told her, proudly, that as a police officer, he knew how to make it look like an accident, or worse, a disappearance. The therapist remembered her face, drained, anxious, and yet full of fight. Vashi wasn't someone who gave up. She loved her children more than her own life. The therapist refused to believe she had ended it herself. But Brett told another story. When the police brought him in, he feigned shock. Claimed he was devastated. He was a single father now, grieving. His wife had taken her own life, he said. They'd argued about the divorce and money, and she had fallen into depression. Maybe she couldn't handle it. Maybe she set the fire out of despair. He even hinted that she hated the house, that it had become a symbol of everything broken between them. He admitted he had threatened her. But those were just jokes, he claimed. Bad jokes. He had never meant to scare her, only stop the divorce. It was all about keeping the family together, he insisted. Yet his story didn't sit right. When he described rushing into the fire to save her, barefoot, shirtless, wrapping his arms around her bleeding body, there were no burns. No smoke inhalation. Not a single blister or hair out of place. His clothes were untouched. It didn't add up. Firefighters found fires set in multiple locations, deliberate, coordinated. Someone had wanted to destroy everything, including Vashi. It was the details that betrayed him. Gasoline traces were found on the pants Brett wore that night. His computer held searches like how to burn evidence and how to stage a suicide. Worst of all, the handwritten notes Vashi supposedly left behind? Forgeries. The slant was wrong, the pressure of the pen unnatural, and the loops of the letters not hers. Someone had tried to imitate her desperation, but Vashi hadn't written those words. 40 minutes passed between the start of the fire and Brett's call to 911. 40 minutes when he moved through the house, not in panic, but with purpose. Erasing footprints, wiping surfaces, throwing away whatever might tie him to her final moments. But the house didn't let go of its secrets. As the investigation deepened, a chilling portrait emerged of a man who couldn't stand to lose control, and a woman who had fought to escape but never made it out. Vashi's death wasn't a spontaneous tragedy. It was premeditated, masked in smoke and sorrow, but stitched with intent. Even now, the air in that house feels different. Heavy. As though it remembers. As though it's waiting for justice. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces left behind, the echo of a mother's love still lingers, stronger than the fire that tried to silence it. He tried to copy her handwriting. Clumsily. The strokes were all wrong, too rushed, uneven. As if he was mimicking more than a signature, trying to replicate her presence in ink, and failing. Maybe he thought it wouldn't matter, that no one would look too closely. But they did. And that was the beginning of the unraveling. When Vashi was found, the room told its own story, separate from the one he would later try to weave. She was lying motionless, eyes forever closed, surrounded by a silence too deep for sleep. The firearm rested underneath her, muzzle pointed awkwardly downward. It didn't make sense. Not physically. Not logically. Not even emotionally. Tests were run. The kind that strip away lies and sentiment and expose nothing but cold truth. The angle of the gunshot didn't line up with self-infliction. For her to have pulled that trigger herself, she would have had to contort her arm in a way that defied natural movement. The gun should have been at her side, or on the floor beside the chair if she'd done it sitting. But it wasn't. It was underneath her, as though placed deliberately. Or dropped in haste. Or hidden, but not well. More importantly, there were no gunpowder burns on her hands, no residue on her skin. Her lungs were clear of soot. Her blood didn't tell the tale of someone who was alive when the fire consumed parts of the house. She was already gone by then. And fires, after all, are sometimes set not to destroy evidence, but to confuse it, to erase the order of a crime and replace it with chaos. Brett wasn't an immediate suspect. Not at first. The police didn't test his hands for residue. Maybe they believed the shock in his voice when he called 911. Maybe they bought the fear. Maybe they just didn't want to believe a father would do this. Not with his children nearby. Not while they slept. But evidence is persistent. It has a way of resurfacing like bones in thawed soil. By May 14, 2011, Brett couldn't outrun it anymore. He was arrested and charged with murder, arson, and the cruelest charge of all, endangering the lives of his own children. The ones he'd carried out of the burning house like some hero. A performance worthy of applause, if only it hadn't followed a tragedy he orchestrated. The trial didn't begin until 2 years later. Enough time for stories to be rewritten, for grief to settle into something quieter, colder. But the courtroom was filled with facts, not fiction. Expert after expert took the stand, handwriting analysts, ballistics specialists, forensic scientists. They painted a picture that Brett could not smudge with denial. The defense tried to poke holes. They tried to say the gun placement was coincidence. That the fire was unrelated. That Vashi had her demons. But the jury wasn't buying it. They knew what fear looked like. And more importantly, they knew what guilt tried to hide. Brett had refused to accept a divorce. Refused to share custody. Refused to let go. And so, in the eyes of the prosecution, he decided if he couldn't keep his family together, he'd tear it apart. He got the kids out, yes. But that only made it worse. It showed calculation. Cold intent. 5 hours. That's all it took the jury to decide his fate. Brett Seacat was 37 when the gavel came down. Guilty. First-degree murder. Arson. Child endangerment. Life in prison. Plus 6 years and 3 months more. Not that he'd need them. But horrors like these don't end in courtrooms. They echo. They linger in the walls where flames once danced. In the bedrooms where children still dream. In the silence of a woman whose life was reduced to evidence. It wasn't the first case to chill the bones of a town. And it wouldn't be the last. Take Michael, for example. A different story, a different tragedy. But the same darkness hiding in the shape of love. He was born in Pennsylvania in 1953. Just a boy then. Quiet. Kind. A good student with the kind of smile people trusted. He grew up, married his high school sweetheart, built a career in insurance, then pharmaceuticals. He made money. He made friends. He made a home. But even solid foundations can crack. His marriage, though cordial in its demise, ended. The kids still came to visit. No bitter custody battles. No screaming matches. Just silence. Clean breaks. He moved to Bucks County, trying to start over. Found a home near the river. Built an art collection. Lived quietly. Until Jennifer. She was younger. Beautiful. A single mother with fire in her eyes. She sparked something in him. They fell hard. He bought her everything. Jet skis, trips, gifts. Even a tattoo. His first. Her name. They lived like a dream until August 8, 2015, when that dream curdled into nightmare. He was found in his home. Slumped in a chair. At first glance, it seemed peaceful. Like he'd fallen asleep reading. But there was blood. So much of it. Pooling beneath him. Smearing across his mouth and chest. A wound between his eyes told the truth that his expression could not. Murder. Not a heart attack. Not an accident. Cold, clinical murder. The gun wasn't near him. It wasn't anywhere. But a cartridge was. 10 meters away. A .380 caliber shell, one echo from the fatal shot. And suddenly, the room became a crime scene. No struggle. No overturned furniture. Just absence. His watch, laptop, phone, gone. A robbery, maybe. Or a cover. Whoever did it moved like a ghost, silent, deliberate, final. But ghosts don't use bullets. People do. As investigators peeled back the layers of Michael's life, questions began to emerge. About Jennifer. About their relationship. About what changed in those final weeks. Some whispers said he wanted to end things. Others claimed she feared losing the lifestyle he gave her. Whatever the truth, only one thing is certain. Michael didn't see it coming. And in the end, neither did anyone else. 2 tragedies. 2 lives extinguished by hands they once trusted. 2 homes turned into haunted spaces. And one chilling reminder, sometimes, love wears a mask. And when it slips, what's left behind can be terrifying. The investigators who sifted through the details of Michael's death uncovered something chilling. He legally owned 2 guns, but only one was found at the scene. The holster for his trusted Smith & Wesson .38 was empty. What made this haunting was the cold, brutal fact, Michael had been shot with that very missing gun. It wasn't just any weapon, it was one he kept locked away for self-defense. Whoever pulled the trigger knew exactly where to find it. There was no sign of a fight, no struggle, no bruises or injuries on Michael's body. This wasn't a random act of violence. The killer was someone who knew the house, every corner, every hiding spot, and the location of that gun. They moved with terrifying precision, slipping in and out without making a sound, without leaving a trace. As the detectives began to probe deeper, they turned their gaze toward those closest to Michael. The theory of a robbery quickly fell apart. Michael's pockets were empty, his phone, laptop, and watch were gone, but strangely, other valuable things remained untouched. His impressive art collection, filled with rare and priceless paintings, was still there, undisturbed. Each painting was even carefully lit, almost as if the killer wanted them to be seen. This wasn't about money. The thief didn't come for riches but for something far darker, a cold, calculated murder. The crime scene was staged, made to look like a robbery, but it was all a cruel illusion meant to mislead the investigators. What was truly taken were Michael's information storage devices, his phone and laptop, likely holding secrets someone wanted buried forever. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows or doors. The killer was either someone Michael trusted or someone who had access to the house. Maybe Michael even let them in, unknowingly inviting death through his own door. The detectives dug into Michael's recent life and found no obvious enemies. His long-term relationship with Jennifer Morrissey, a mysterious woman of 33, was their only lead. Jennifer, described by neighbors as private and secretive, had disappeared without a trace shortly after Michael was found dead. That disappearance alone screamed suspicion. Jennifer's past was shadowed by darkness. She had a troubled childhood, riddled with abuse and bitter conflicts with her mother. She claimed to have been raped multiple times during her teenage years, but her mother refused to believe her, leaving Jennifer isolated and broken. She dropped out of school and left home, fighting severe depression and loneliness. She supported herself by working as a mechanic, a tough job for a woman in a man's world, and bought a sporty motorcycle, roaming the city's night roads with reckless abandon. She was a thrill seeker, her tattoos telling stories of pain and defiance, words etched across her chest and biceps, a grinning skull inked on her arm like a warning. At just 20, Jennifer became a mother, abandoned by the child's father. To survive, she juggled 2 jobs, mechanic by day, nightclub dancer by night, and poured every ounce of strength into securing a future for her child. It was in that smoky nightclub in Pennsylvania, back in 2012, where fate twisted its cruel hand. Michael McNew, 59, a regular patron, met Jennifer. Their encounter wasn't magical. It began with a strange bargain. Jennifer agreed to go on a date only if Michael paid her overdue electricity bill. From there, their relationship spiraled into a whirlwind of lavish dinners, expensive gifts, and trips. Michael showered Jennifer with jewelry, a motorcycle, even a car. She called him her sugar daddy, and he was happy to indulge her. Jennifer saw Michael as her ticket out of hardship, a way to finally grasp respect and security she'd never known. By 2015, they were living together. But the perfect facade cracked. Neighbors heard their furious arguments, the tension simmering just beneath the surface. A few months before Michael's death, a particularly violent quarrel ended in separation. Though they still shared the house, the silence between them was thick and heavy. Then Jennifer vanished. Police reached out to Michael's children, who were devastated and struggling to believe their father was gone. His son Patrick flew in from Pittsburgh, and his daughter and her mother came from Maryland. Patrick was blunt. He never respected Jennifer and warned his father about her greed and ruthlessness. The family feared she was a dangerous influence, someone who might exploit Michael's wealth. The wedding of Michael's daughter, Katie, in June 2016, was a turning point. She forbade Jennifer from attending, and Michael chose to skip the event altogether. Yet, despite the strain and the warnings, Michael made Jennifer the beneficiary of 2 life insurance policies worth nearly $500,000. Rumors swirled: Jennifer's frequent drug use, her manipulation, the possibility of an affair. The relationship between father and son fell apart under her shadow, broken by fights and bitterness. Many suspected Jennifer's motives were far from innocent, that she aimed to control Michael's fortune by any means. But by 2017, even Jennifer began pulling away. She disappeared without warning, returning late at night, speaking little and offering no explanations. Her withdrawal was unsettling. Was she hiding something darker? Was she losing control or planning her next move? The house still held its secrets. The shadows whispered of betrayal, trust shattered like glass. The missing gun, the staged robbery, the vanished woman, all pieces of a grim puzzle waiting to be solved. The night had swallowed Michael whole, but the truth, dark and twisted, was waiting to claw its way back into the light. Jennifer hadn't seemed present in the relationship for a long time. Her eyes, once eager and bright, had grown dull, consumed by something far more potent than love or loyalty. She'd fallen into the grip of stronger addictions, ones that numbed reality and blurred her judgment until even her own reflection became unrecognizable. During that time, Jennifer spiraled hard. She was arrested multiple times, twice for drug-related offenses, once for causing an accident. That last one had left a cyclist broken and bloodied on the pavement. Still, Michael stayed. He believed in fixing things, people, problems, relationships. He stood by her, even when the world told him to walk away. He paid her legal fees, covered fines, helped her stay out of jail. It cost him around $4,000, but the real price was far more than money. Michael's children, Patrick and Katie, saw the signs long before he did. They'd always been wary of Jennifer, but they had learned to keep quiet until the weeks before his death. That's when Michael finally admitted he was done. The engagement was off, the wedding cancelled. He was tired of being her lifeline. He wanted out. But for Jennifer, his exit was a death sentence. Without him, she had nothing. No money. No big house. No life of luxury. He had been her last thread to comfort, and now it was unraveling. Michael was found dead in his home, his body discovered by co-workers who hadn't heard from him in 2 days. The cause was a close-range gunshot to the face. The bullet shattered on impact, fragmenting into his skull, ending his life instantly. The horror wasn't just in the violence, it was in the intimacy of it. Someone had looked him in the eye and pulled the trigger. Jennifer became the prime suspect immediately. She was still on probation from the accident and was required to check in regularly. The police gambled on her showing up, and 4 days after Michael's murder, she did. She came in, oddly calm, to settle a court payment. She even casually mentioned she'd seen on the news that Michael had died, as if it had only just reached her. But the murder had been all over TV and social media the moment it happened. Why did she wait for days to say anything? Detectives invited her to return the next day for a few questions about a t-shirt. They didn't want to spook her. In the meantime, they worked fast to get warrants and pull her communication records. But Jennifer didn't show up the next day. She vanished. Detectives had seen this before. When someone disappears after a murder, they're usually not planning a vacation. They're buying time, building an alibi, destroying evidence, burying the truth. The police began gathering more threads. Michael's friends painted a disturbing picture. He'd called one of them shortly before his death, clearly shaken. He said he feared for his life. Jennifer had another man, someone Michael had just found out about. A man who went by the name Ruthless. Michael didn't want to fight. He was a calm man, a fixer, not a warrior. But Ruthless was different. The man's real name was Charles Kulo, a name already etched into police records. A career criminal. Drug trafficking, assaults, his rap sheet was as long as it was dangerous. Just days before Michael's murder, Charles had been released from custody. And within hours of that, Jennifer had moved in with him. She left Michael, yes, but not entirely. Many of her belongings were still at Michael's house, and she continued to drop by to retrieve them. Michael had warned her to stop. He didn't want her there anymore. He even threatened to throw out her things. The police began to see the bigger picture. Jennifer had been juggling 2 lives, and when Michael decided to cut her off, her new life with Charles was at risk too. That threat may have been enough to justify murder in their eyes. Then came August 25, 2017. Jennifer, who had been missing since dodging her meeting with detectives, was finally arrested at the motorcycle repair shop where she worked. The charge was for violating probation, but the police had other plans. In jail, Jennifer's behavior turned erratic. One of her cellmates later told investigators that Jennifer confessed, without emotion or remorse, to killing Michael. It wasn't a story. It was a flat, soulless admission, like recounting the weather. When detectives brought her in for questioning, Jennifer refused to speak. She lawyered up immediately. But by then, the evidence was mounting. Her phone had been found at the scene of the murder. Not just found, connected. At exactly 9:45 p.m. on August 6, her phone automatically linked to Michael's Wi-Fi network. That meant she had been right inside the house, close enough for the signal to catch her. Data showed she left the house shortly after and traveled 20 kilometers south, to Charles' trailer. She arrived around 11 p.m. But Michael's phone didn't leave the house until about 1 a.m., when it stopped transmitting entirely, likely after being dumped in a river. If Jennifer had already left, who took the phone? That night was filled with ghosts. Evidence of 2 people moving in darkness, trying to erase a life and the traces of their crime. But digital footprints don't lie. Neither do blood stains or shattered glass. As investigators continued to dig, they discovered Jennifer had a second phone. That device, too, was seized. What it revealed added yet another layer to the unraveling nightmare. The truth, as always, wasn't hidden under floorboards or in some whispered confession. It was everywhere, flickering between cell towers, etched in GPS logs, sleeping in Wi-Fi routers. It was written in Michael's final days, in his fear, in the way he tried to escape a woman who had already decided that if she couldn't have him, no one could. And maybe that's the most haunting part. Not just the act of killing, but the silence before it, the slow, suffocating descent into darkness where love turns to obsession, and a heartbeat becomes a target. The kind of ending you don't just watch. You feel it. Long after the screen goes black. It was late in the evening when they finally cracked it. The phone, sleek and silent, once belonged to Michael. Locked behind a wall of passcodes, it had become a digital coffin, sealed tight with secrets. There was a very real fear they'd never get in. But fate has a way of leaving back doors. Jennifer, the woman who once lived in Michael's arms and now stood on the other side of this investigation, had left behind a list of old passwords on Michael's computer. The detectives tried each one, and with a quiet click, the device unlocked. What spilled out wasn't just data. It was a ghost whispering from beyond the grave. The messages, though partially deleted by Jennifer, had been reconstructed by the forensic team. Piece by piece, they uncovered a chilling timeline. In the final days before his death, Michael had been talking to Jennifer. She'd tried to scrub it clean, but the traces were enough. He had been planning to go to the FBI. He had proof that would put Charles behind bars for life. Charles, the man Jennifer now called her lover. For him, prison meant the end. And Michael? Michael was the man standing in the way of everything. According to investigators, that was all the motive needed. Charles, with his slippery grin and unbothered eyes, had dismissed the threat. But Jennifer didn't take it lightly. She panicked. Michael had written her one last message, "I love you." She never answered. After his death, Jennifer's behavior shifted into something strange. On social media, she began weaving a web of lies. Some friends heard he'd been attacked. Others heard they'd broken up long ago. It was a performance meant to confuse, to scatter truth like ashes in the wind. But the detectives weren't fooled. When they brought Charles in, he sang. Not to protect Jennifer, but to save himself. He claimed he never touched Michael. He said it was Jennifer. That night, she came home late, shaken, eyes wide, whispering her confession into the dim light of their trailer. She told him Michael had pulled a gun. That they struggled. That the shot had been an accident. But Charles wanted no part in cleaning it up. He called on his friend Jerry instead. Jerry, a quiet man who lived in a trailer with his mother, agreed to take her back to the river house. At first, he didn't ask questions. But when they arrived, and the cold, dead quiet filled the air, he understood. Inside the house, there were no signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture. No broken glass. No chaos. Just Michael, slumped in his chair, like he'd never even seen it coming. Jennifer didn't check his pulse. Didn't kneel. Didn't cry. Instead, she took his watch from his wrist, grabbed his laptop, and tossed his phone into the river as if erasing him would undo the night. Then Jerry drove her home. Forensics later found her DNA in Michael's pockets. She had searched him. Charles, meanwhile, had his own defense. He'd been in an accident before the murder. He was in a wheelchair at the time, unable to stand without help. Medical records backed it up. He was recovering. Broken. Fragile. And, more importantly, under strict probation. He couldn't afford a parking ticket, let alone a murder. The evidence piled up like bones. On September 29, 2017, Jennifer Morsey was charged with first-degree murder, robbery, and tampering with evidence. Her trial was scheduled for January 24, 2019. The prosecution painted a picture of betrayal, greed, and rage. Michael had stopped funding her lavish lifestyle. That had cut deep. But deeper still was her desire for money. She stood to gain $500,000 from a life insurance policy if Michael died. The key witness? Jerry. He took the stand and didn't flinch. He told the court about that night, the ride to the river house, Jennifer's coldness, her silence, the eerie way she walked through the scene as if she'd been there before. Because she had. She wasn't there to grieve. She was there to make sure he stayed dead. In exchange for his cooperation, Jerry was never charged. Neither was Charles. Though he had protected Jennifer in the beginning and helped cover up the crime, he flipped on her when the walls closed in. Inmates who'd met Jennifer while she awaited trial also testified. She wasn't just cold, they said, she was manipulative, unpredictable, angry. Jennifer tried to salvage her story. She took the stand and gave her version, how Michael met her at the door with a gun. How she fought for her life. How the shot went off accidentally, hitting him in the face. But her words didn't match the evidence. Michael hadn't been near the door. He had been seated in a chair when the bullet pierced his skull, shot clean between the eyes from nearly 10 feet away. Execution style. The forensics left no doubt. There had been no struggle. No hesitation. Just a single shot. Cold. Final. On February 1, 2019, the jury returned with their verdict. Jennifer Morsey was found guilty on all counts: murder, theft, tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Even then, she showed no remorse. Her eyes were empty, her face unreadable. But Michael's son, he never forgot. It was his father's phone, his father's words, his father's love that lit the path to truth. The last thing Michael ever said still echoed, even now, years later. "I love you." She never answered. During the investigation, he didn't try to hide it. Again and again, he spoke of the hatred he held for Jennifer. He blamed her, not quietly, not with restraint, but like a wound that refused to close. She took his father from him. Not physically, no, but emotionally, mentally, and entirely. Because of her, the fragile thread that held father and son together had snapped. And in his mind, there would never be a way to tie it back together again. But this story isn't about Jennifer. Not exactly. This is about a different kind of heartbreak, one that started as love, as they all do, and slowly rotted from the inside out. Janet Abraroa grew up in a little Virginia town where life was simple and faith ran deep. She was the 7th child in a devout Mormon family, and like most girls in her community, she was raised to believe in the sacredness of love, marriage, and family. But Janet was different in many ways. She was lively, sharp, fiercely independent, never the type to simply follow, but to lead. And she had one dream more vivid than the rest, to be a mother. She was also athletic, playing football and basketball, even diving into swimming meets. Her energy was contagious, her smile disarming. By the time she entered college, Janet was already someone people remembered. It was during one of her university sports games that she met Raven, a young, charismatic football player. He was bold, magnetic, confident, and dangerous in ways Janet hadn't yet learned to recognize. What started as flirtation became a love story. For 2 years, they dated, and though Janet kept some boundaries in line with her beliefs, she fell for him completely. When he proposed, she was only 20. Raven was just 19. Too young, some whispered. But love doesn't care about numbers. They married in August of 2000 and started what seemed to everyone else like a perfect life. They moved to Durham, North Carolina, found jobs at a local sporting goods store, and rented a cozy suburban house. On the outside, they were the golden couple. But the foundation was already cracking. Rumors started early. Janet's calls to her family became heavy with doubt. She confided in close friends that she believed Raven was cheating. With who, she couldn't always say, but the gut feeling was always there. She once packed up and left for a few days. But she came back. Because she believed in love. Because she wanted to fix what was broken. Not long after her return, she found out she was pregnant. The timing was cruel. A new life was growing inside her just as her own sense of safety and trust had been destroyed. Raven admitted to infidelity, and though he promised change, his sincerity was always in question. Still, Janet chose to stay. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the deep, echoing loneliness of a woman who wanted a family more than anything. As her belly grew, so did her isolation. Friends from the neighborhood offered kindness. Some even confronted Raven, asking him to be better, to be present, to stop cheating on a pregnant woman who had given him everything. He nodded, promised again. But change never really came. On October 17, 2004, their son Caden was born. For Janet, he was everything. Her days were filled with lullabies and feedings and whispered prayers in the quiet hours of the night. But their financial situation was deteriorating. Janet had stopped working. Raven's paycheck wasn't enough. They got behind on rent, and their landlord, kind but frustrated, allowed a grace period. Even their church stepped in to help. Then, in December of that year, things got worse. Raven was arrested. He had been stealing from the store, tracksuits, sports gear, anything he could sell online. Over $9,000 in losses. He didn't just lose his job. He lost the last thread of respect Janet had tried to hold onto. She quit too, unable to face the humiliation. Raven avoided jail but was slapped with probation and a $10,000 restitution order. With both parents unemployed and Raven's criminal record haunting every job application, the future looked grim. Janet picked up part-time work where she could. They leaned on family. But survival was hand-to-mouth. Then came the night that ended everything. April 26, 2005. Janet picked up baby Caden from daycare. She made dinner. They sat together, like any other night, pretending, performing the part of a family still intact. Afterward, she and Caden went to bed. Raven said he left for a local soccer game in nearby Mauriceville. He came home to silence. Then the kind of silence that isn't stillness, but dread. Janet was on the floor. Her blood had soaked into the carpet, pooling like dark ink. Caden was in his crib, crying but untouched. Raven called 911, gasping that his wife had been shot. But when paramedics arrived, they found no gunshot wound. Janet had been stabbed. Repeatedly. The wound to her neck was fatal. She likely never even screamed. There was no sign of forced entry. No evidence of a break-in. Just Janet, murdered in her own home, while her infant son slept feet away. The town fell into mourning. But suspicion? That settled fast. Raven's story changed, small details, conflicting times, uncertain behaviors. He showed grief, yes. But not the kind that feels real. Not the kind that stains your soul. He remained distant. Cold. Something about his eyes, they didn't match the weight of what had happened. And then, during trial preparations, the darkness inside him spilled out. It wasn't just grief. It was resentment. He blamed Janet. For his failures. For his mistakes. For not being the wife he thought he deserved. Behind closed doors, he admitted to hating her. And when he finally stood in front of a jury, his hatred was laid bare. He didn't mourn her loss, he cursed her memory. Her family wept silently as the court listened. This wasn't just a man betrayed by life. This was a man consumed by rage. As the case unraveled, it became clear Janet hadn't just been killed. She had been erased. By the man who once vowed to love her forever. And Caden? He would grow up with questions that no one should have to ask. Raised by shadows, haunted by a night he couldn't remember, but one that changed everything. Janet Abraroa had dreamed of a beautiful, faithful love. What she got was something else entirely. And in that quiet little house in Durham, where laughter once echoed and lullabies once played, all that remained was silence and blood. Late at night, the lights inside the house flickered gently, shadows dancing across the pale cream walls where memories once clung like dust. That house, once filled with laughter, had turned into something sinister. It held a secret now, a violent, unspeakable truth buried beneath the silence of its rooms. Janet Abaroa never imagined that her last breath would echo in the place she called home. Her life was quiet, gentle, marked by prayer, morning routines, and dreams of raising her unborn child. But one night, it all ended. Janet was murdered, and her baby, a life yet to take its first breath, was killed with her. The brutality of it stunned even the most seasoned investigators. When police first arrived, they couldn't grasp the full horror of what had occurred. There were no signs of forced entry. No shattered glass. No splintered door frames. Just Janet's body, crumpled on the floor of the upstairs room, a pool of blood slowly staining the carpet beneath her. Her body was sent to the forensic lab immediately. There, under the cold glow of autopsy lights, 3 deep stab wounds told the story. One was on her hand, clear evidence of a final, desperate attempt to defend herself. But the fatal wound was on her neck. The attacker had severed a major artery. The death would have been swift, merciless. She wouldn't have lasted more than a few minutes. The silence in that house was no longer peaceful. It was loaded, heavy, haunted. And yet, something didn't sit right with the investigators. There were pieces missing, critical moments lost in time. The experts couldn't even agree on the exact time of death. But there were clues, if one looked closely. A bloody shoe print. A lone fingerprint. Neither matched anyone in the house. Whoever did this had been let inside willingly. Raven Abaroa, Janet's husband, was the first to be questioned. He said he had been out playing a mini football game in Mauriceville, returned home at precisely 10:40 p.m., and found her dead upstairs. His voice trembled at first, but not from grief. Something else. Something harder to name. Raven told the officers he believed Janet may have taken her own life. He said she'd been acting strange, distant. That the stress of their finances might have finally broken her spirit. But this claim was quickly dismissed by those who truly knew Janet. Friends. Family. They were adamant Janet would never have done such a thing. She was religious, grounded, and despite the struggles, hopeful. And besides, no one stabs themselves 3 times. Especially not in the neck. The police kept returning to one fact: there was no forced entry. No robbery. Nothing was taken except Raven's laptop and a few kitchen knives, one of which was likely the murder weapon. Jewelry, cash, electronics, all untouched. This wasn't a burglary. This was personal. As suspicions grew, so did Raven's odd behavior. He didn't weep. He didn't plead for justice. The day after the murder, he packed up and left with his young son, heading to Utah. His reason? He needed to be near family. He said the house held too much pain. Maybe so. But the timing, the speed of his departure, it was chilling. Even stranger, he showed little interest in the investigation. He refused to help with flyers or reward notices. He didn't return calls. Janet's family poured their energy into finding the truth, while Raven turned his back and vanished into the mountains of Utah. That's when things took an even darker turn. Police uncovered a detail that tightened the noose around him. Just before Janet's death, Raven had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on her, right after finding out she was pregnant again. The couple had been drowning in debt. They couldn't afford basic necessities. And yet, he'd somehow paid the premiums. Even more disturbing, Raven contacted the insurance company to claim the money mere hours after Janet's death, before her body had even been laid to rest. Behind his charm, his neat haircuts, his Mormon persona, Raven was hiding something grotesque. He wasn't who he said he was. His stories about missionary work in Peru were fabricated. His past was a quilt of lies. And as soon as he received that insurance payout, he reinvented himself in Utah. New town. New face. New life. There, he met Vanessa Pont, a single mother living nearby. She was kind, gentle, a little lonely. Easy prey. Raven wrapped her in his charm like a spider spinning silk. He told her his wife had died in a car crash. Omitted the truth. Hid the blood. But Janet's family never stopped watching. They tracked his lies. They heard the whispers. The fact that he told people Janet died in an accident made them sick. Was it guilt? Was it fear? Or had he grown comfortable hiding behind a fantasy? Vanessa eventually became curious. She dug a little deeper. She learned the truth. 3 stab wounds. Defensive injuries. A dead baby. No accident. But by then, Raven had already slipped deeper into his second life. Still, the shadows of the past were catching up to him. Janet's family wasn't giving up. The police, too, were circling back. Because monsters like Raven don't just vanish. They leave trails, paper, blood, lies. And somewhere, in the quietest corners of that old house, you could still feel it. That something awful had happened there. A presence that lingered. A room that never truly warmed again. Maybe it was Janet. Maybe it was the baby. Or maybe it was just what evil leaves behind. But everyone who entered said the same thing. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a warning. Raven kept insisting he had nothing to do with Janet's death. Over and over again, he told anyone who would listen that it was a robbery gone wrong. A masked intruder had broken in, attacked her, and left him a widower, not a killer. Strangely, Vanessa believed him. She didn't listen to the warnings. Janet's family had reached out to her, pleaded even, telling her to be careful, telling her that Raven had a darkness in him, one that might not show until it was too late. But Vanessa was already caught in the web. There was something about Raven that made her ignore the warnings, push away the doubt. She trusted him. Loved him. Or thought she did. 3 years passed and she became his wife. But marriage revealed what charm had hidden. Raven's temper was quick, violent even. His anger didn't build, it erupted. Vanessa soon found herself walking on eggshells, unsure of what small misstep would send him into one of his fits. The fear was constant. When he snapped, he didn't just shout, he became someone else entirely. A stranger behind familiar eyes. Their marriage crumbled in just 4 months. Vanessa left, shaken but alive. By then, the pressure from law enforcement was tightening around Raven. The whispers never stopped, and the glare of suspicion had followed him from the beginning. Tired of it all, he spoke to the press, claiming he wanted justice too. He hoped, he said, that the real killer would be found so he could finally live in peace. But there was something hollow in his voice. Something that didn't quite ring true. A new detective had taken over the case by then. He wasn't willing to let the trail go cold. Janet's family worked closely with him, hoping someone would finally see the truth. Vanessa, on the outside now, began to unravel. The man she once loved now haunted her thoughts. She began to wonder, what if the warnings had been right? What if she'd married a murderer? Doubt twisted into fear. She went public, told reporters about the man behind closed doors. About the Christmas night that shattered any illusion she had left. They had argued, something stupid, maybe even nothing. Raven's rage exploded. He locked her in the bathroom and screamed through the door that he hated her. That he wouldn't care if she died. She believed him. And that night, she realized something terrifying. If he could say that to her, if he could mean it, maybe Janet never had a chance. The police were now convinced. Raven was at the heart of it all. But proving it wasn't easy. His alibi was airtight on paper. He was at a local mini-soccer game, surrounded by friends and teammates. Multiple people vouched for him. The bloody fingerprints at the scene weren't his. The shoe prints didn't match. On the surface, it didn't add up. But there were cracks. When the police called to ask more questions, Raven stuck to his original story, but the details slipped. He couldn't remember small things, inconsistencies piled up. And then there was the missing knife. He claimed one had vanished from his kitchen the same night Janet died. He said it must have been stolen, maybe even the murder weapon. Yet, somehow, the police had missed it during their initial search, something Raven used to argue they were incompetent. The investigators didn't buy it. They'd spent days combing through the house, every inch meticulously examined. Still, the case sat cold. Nothing concrete. Only shadows. But there was more. His former girlfriends painted a grim picture, manipulative, aggressive, sometimes downright dangerous. One detail stood out: the night Janet died, Raven locked his dog in the garage. A dog that normally had the run of the house. The police found that odd. Was he trying to keep the dog from interfering? Or from barking, drawing attention to something no one was supposed to see? And just one day before the murder, Raven transferred data from his laptop to an external drive. The laptop was later reported stolen. But not just stolen, gone without a trace on the very day Janet was killed. That transfer, it felt like preparation. All of it circled back to one conclusion. The net was tightening. The day Raven was arrested, he didn't fight it. He was extradited to North Carolina, charged with first-degree murder. But prosecutors struggled. The evidence, while compelling, was circumstantial. Without something definitive, something that tied him undeniably to the scene, it was still just suspicion. Then came the detail that everyone missed. The crime scene photos were re-examined. On the nightstand beside Janet's bed, an empty contact lens case sat open. A small thing. Easy to overlook. But her parents insisted she never, ever went to bed with her lenses in. She always took them out first, no matter how tired she was. If the case was empty, if her lenses were missing, had she not gone to bed at all? The forensic pathologist hadn't noted whether she had contact lenses in her eyes during the autopsy. A slip that could change everything. If Janet was wearing her lenses when she died, it would destroy Raven's timeline. It would mean she hadn't been asleep. It would mean the attack happened while she was still awake, before Raven left the house. Janet's family pushed for an exhumation. They needed to know. They needed the truth, even if it meant digging up the past, literally. July 2010, Janet's body was exhumed. The results were haunting. Traces of dry, warped contact lenses were found in her eyes. Even after all that time, something of them remained. But that wasn't enough. The defense would argue contamination, mistake, anything to sow doubt. So, the experts began a chilling experiment. Using pig eyes, chosen for their similarity to human ones, they fitted them with contact lenses, embalmed them, buried them, and examined them again. Over and over. A year of testing. And the results were clear. Yes, it was possible. Contact lenses could survive embalming and burial in a way consistent with what they found in Janet. Which meant Raven's story was unraveling. The trial began in 2013. The courtroom was packed. The media circled like vultures. Everyone wanted to hear how a seemingly normal man became the center of a murder mystery soaked in grief and shadows. The jury was shown the science, the behavior, the inconsistencies, the threats, the fear in Vanessa's voice as she recounted the night he told her he didn't care if she died. There was no smoking gun. But there was something colder. Something darker. A pattern. And sometimes, that's enough. Not everyone agreed on what the truth was. But for those who had lived through it, Janet's parents, her friends, even Vanessa, there was no more doubt. They had seen the mask slip. And what stared back was not innocence. It was Raven. There was no smoking gun. No security footage. No fingerprint smeared across the weapon. No direct evidence tying Raven to what happened that night. And yet, the weight of suspicion was undeniable. The case crept its way to the Supreme Court, carried mostly on the shaky shoulders of circumstantial evidence. But for those who knew Janet, her friends, her family, there was never a doubt. They didn't need courtroom theatrics or prosecutors' PowerPoints. They had their memories. They had the haunting words she left behind. Just a month before her life was stolen, Janet had started voicing her fears. Quietly at first, like testing the waters. Then louder. She confided in her sister over coffee one morning that Raven was changing, no, not changing. Revealing who he really was. His temper was no longer something he could hide. When things got tense, when the smallest spark lit a conversation, he became someone else, unrecognizable, eyes gone cold, jaw clenched, rage burning through his voice like gasoline. Janet's mother had been there more than once when the fights erupted. The kind of arguments where you don't raise your voice, you lower it. Quiet, cruel, measured words that left bruises without a single touch. She watched her daughter shrink over time, like someone slowly disappearing. Raven didn't deny they fought. He couldn't. There were too many witnesses to ignore. But he was careful. Calm. In his interviews with police, he admitted to disagreements, but denied everything else. He painted a picture of an ordinary couple going through a rough patch. That's all. Nothing more. But when the trial began, cracks started to show. The defense leaned into the idea that the investigation had been rushed, that police had tunnel vision. That they had focused so hard on Raven, they'd failed to see the bigger picture. They brought up the bloody footprint found near Janet's body, one that didn't match Raven's shoe size. And the smudge of blood on the front door, again, no DNA match. A third clue, a partial shoe print left in Janet's blood, also failed to align with Raven's footwear. But the prosecution didn't waver. They didn't need DNA. They had something else, Raven himself. He was unpredictable. Volatile. Cold behind a charming smile. Former girlfriends painted the same picture. One woman described how Raven, in a chilling moment of dominance, forced himself on her in a car parked on the side of a dark road. The way he moved, the way he stared at her, it wasn't just lust. It was control. Fear wrapped in a lover's disguise. She later admitted she had deliberately left a strand of hair in his car, just in case she didn't make it home. One thing prosecutors held tightly to was motive. It had emerged during the investigation that Janet was pregnant, something she'd only confided to a few of her sisters. She was happy about it, yes. But she was scared too. Raising a child with someone like Raven felt like a trap she couldn't escape. She told one of her friends she didn't think she could stay with him much longer. That he would never change. That she was already planning her exit. And then, something Raven said shifted the ground beneath him. Initially, he told police he had come home and found Janet already dead, lifeless. Cold. But then, during a church confession, his story cracked. He told someone he trusted with his soul, that she wasn't dead when he found her. That she had still been breathing. That she had tried to say something. That she died looking up at him. The blood hadn't dried yet. Her lips had moved. But instead of calling 911, instead of trying to save her, he did nothing. That detail unraveled any defense he'd tried to build. The investigation took another turn when authorities discovered that Janet had reconnected with an old boyfriend, Scott. They had exchanged messages, but there was no heat between them. It was a conversation between two people trying to remember who they used to be, not reignite a flame. Still, it added tension. Jealousy. Possibility. In 2014, Raven finally gave in. He accepted a plea deal, manslaughter. The word itself felt like a betrayal to Janet's family. Like someone had taken the weight of her death and wrapped it in legal bubble wrap. He was sentenced to 10 years, eligible for parole in 8. Janet's family was left to raise her son, while Raven was released from prison on Christmas Day 2017. He returned to Utah. He lives there still. Janet does not. But that's not the only story that haunted the town that year. Over in Marianna, Florida, the sun-kissed streets were the kind that fooled you into feeling safe. Birds chirped. Lawns were neat. And behind the quiet windows of a kindergarten, Dwayne Barrentine met the woman who would change everything. A note. Just a simple note, handed to him by a pretty blonde woman as he picked up his son from school. It had her number on it. She smiled. He called. And like so many tragedies, it started with charm. Tasha Morton seemed perfect. A single mother, just like him. Her daughter Lexi was the same age as his son. The kids bonded instantly. Tasha was warm, soft-spoken. She made meals, played with the kids, and whispered I love yous like she meant them. Dwayne fell fast. Too fast, his mother warned. But love muffled the warning bells. Soon, they were living together. The kids were happy. Dwayne was glowing. But Tasha, she kept secrets. Her past? Off limits. Her ex? Never discussed. Her smile? Sometimes too wide. Dwayne's mother noticed the cracks first. Strange behavior. Controlling glances. One night, she overheard Lexi muttering in her sleep, saying things no 6-year-old should say. Something about the cold room. About the box. Then came the nights when Dwayne would wake up gasping. Cold sweat. A feeling like someone had been standing over the bed watching him. He chalked it up to stress. But the air felt different. The silence heavier. The house wrong. And then, one night, Tasha and Lexi vanished. No goodbye. No trace. Just an empty house and a sickening silence. Dwayne called the police. Weeks passed. Then months. But Tasha Morton and her daughter had disappeared like smoke. That's when investigators started looking deeper. And what they found unraveled everything. Tasha Morton wasn't her real name. Her past? A graveyard of aliases, sealed records, and whispered threats. Lexi? Not her biological daughter at all. The real Lexi had gone missing years earlier in another state. Tasha had been her babysitter. No bodies were ever found. Just a trail of fake names, short-term addresses, and people who vanished after crossing her path. Some say she moves from town to town, looking for lonely fathers. Vulnerable children. Some say she's still out there. Watching. Waiting. And sometimes, just sometimes, on cold, quiet nights, Dwayne swears he hears tiny footsteps on the wooden floor of his house. Or the soft hum of a lullaby from a room that no one sleeps in anymore.